just like to welcome everybody to our first episode of Advent Inquiry. My name is Jake Wilkinson. I'm the pastor here.
My name is Anson Bartrand.
And my name is Jonah Bartrand.
Yep, we'd just like to welcome you and thank you for tuning in today. Our first question that came up is a very easy to answer one. Obviously, not disputed at all, but the God's existence. And we came at it, what would you say, like more of a personal side of why we believe God exists.
Right. I mean, so some of the common, I guess, logical reasons for why God might exist, like stuff that we see in nature or, the vastness of the universe or the probability that life would even arise by chance were brought up. But I think the conclusion that we came to was that ultimately whether or not somebody believes that God exists is ultimately based on faith.
We talked about the Bible and how it was pretty cohesive through all the authors. And what else did you notice that we talked about that, Anson?
We also talked about prophecy and how things were predicted well in advance.
Mm-hmm.
Like Daniel chapter 2, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Where Daniel interprets Nebuchadnezzar's dream and predicts the next 4 major kingdoms, 5 kingdoms that were going to be, ruling the quote-unquote earth.
Right. We also talked about how it was a personal relationship. I mean, if God is who he says he is, at least the God of the Bible, that he wants a personal relationship with human beings, with his creatures. And so maybe talk a little bit about why that's significant and why that would actually prove to us that there could be a God.
So I think that there's this desire for relationship embedded in the human heart, right? And I think the fact that that is present among all people is indicative that we were, I'm going to say, created with that desire for a relationship, which would, to me, show that the entity that created us wants to be in a relationship with us, as well as us wanting to be in a relationship with others.
And God's desire for us to be in a relationship with him is easily evident in Matthew 7:7, where he says, ask and you shall find, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you'll find, knock and the door will be opened unto you.
Right. He's making that clear to us, at least through the Bible here, that if we seek him, we will find him, which kind of leads us to our next point that we talked about, in that sometimes I think within humanity, we only see what we want to see. We only see what we want to believe. And that's been an argument, I think, actually both people have used it against Christianity a lot or against religion a lot and believing in a divine realm or a spiritual realm. But a lot of times I think that can be an argument for Christianity too. People, if they don't want to see God, I think that he says okay, and he limits himself to that.
Right, and so my background is physics, so a good example of this, I think, to kind of put it into perspective, is that black holes we can't actually directly observe because we can only see light, and black holes, by definition, don't emit any light. But by the way that other objects interact with the black holes, we can see evidence that black holes or something like them exist. And I think that in the same way, if somebody emphatically said they didn't want to believe in black holes, they could say, well, you can't show me the black hole. So, that I don't need to believe in black holes because your evidence is insufficient. And I think the same also holds true for God. We can see evidence of God both in the natural world and, more importantly, in the way that he interacts in people's lives. And that evidence might not be sufficient for some people if they don't want to be convinced. But for others, it certainly is evidence that God does exist.
Right. And we talked about, in our group, how it's kind of the same thing as gravity. Like, there's plenty of existence. Gravity exists because we're sitting here and not, floating up in the air and around this room. We're able to be doing this right now.
But I think it goes, the next question is, how do we know that something is true?
Right.
Right? So, for example, if somebody was to say, prove that this other person exists and they've never met them, which is kind of what somebody that's asking you to prove that God exists is doing. They've never met God, they say, and consequently they're trying to get you to prove that they exist. But how do you prove that somebody actually exists aside from saying, yes, they exist, and that relationship of trust being present so that they do have faith in what you are saying?
Right.
And I actually believe that question should be clarified a little bit further. How do you know something exists, or how do you believe something exists? Because you can believe something exists rather than knowing it for certain.
Can you elaborate on the difference a little bit there?
So, for example, I believe Joe Biden exists. I've never met the guy, probably never will meet the guy. But from all the evidence and effects I have seen on our society, I can believe that he exists.
So you're saying that you believe that he exists because there is sufficient evidence for you to say that in all probability he does, but it's impossible for you to know personally without having met him yourself that he does in fact exist.
And we even went down this road where we kind of talked about, like, well, even if you did shake his hand and meet him, how do you even prove that he exists? At some point you just say, yes, that person or that thing exists that we're talking about. And at some point we all just believe that this is not
The Matrix.
Yeah, exactly. We talked about that, and we at some point this is kind of the reality that we have to deal with, and this is real life, and it's not just some computer program that we're inputted into. Some people may believe that, but I think that's a little bit irrational. Yeah.
Right. I think we have to start with certain ground rules, and a good ground rule to start with is that what we see and observe is in fact reality.
And we talked about even responses to prayers that were answered that and it happens over and over and over again, where it's just like, I can't see another way. And I talked about that in my own life, where it's just happened over and over and over again. And it's like, I don't have any other explanation other than something had a hand in this that was beyond me, that was beyond power of anything that I've known in the, I don't know, visual realm, I guess.
So we're kind of talking about personal experience there.
Yeah.
All right. So what that's telling me is that ultimately, to actually know God, and more specifically to know that he does exist, it requires some personal interaction with him. We can have faith in the testimony of others, but ultimately, in order to be convicted yourself that God does exist, it requires personal interaction, because God, the Christian God, is a personal God. He wants to have individual interactions with people. He's not just this puppet master up in the sky that's sitting down here and controlling things on earth. He wants personal interactions, and that's how he is known to people.
And even just the response to death is that, we're just not okay with it. Look what happens when someone you love dies. It just seems so wrong. And there's a quote by C.S. Lewis that says, if you find in yourself a longing that nothing in this world can satisfy, it simply means that you are made for another world. And I think that as far as the biblical perspective goes, death is not actually something natural. It's something we have in a fallen world, but it's not something it's just not supposed to be. And I can't escape that feeling myself, especially when someone younger, we're used to older people dying sometimes like that, but we're never really ready if we really love them and really connected with them,
Right, we always want more time.
Yeah, we always want more time. We always want some sort of connection with that loved one and that lost one, whether it's even if it's an animal, a puppy that almost died in my instance, where it was just like this devastating thing, even though it's this thing that's going to die in 7 years anyway, and we know it, but there's something about death, and there's something about that is just so wrong. It's the absence of life, and it robs life even from the ones that still live.
Right. And actually we kind of have this inherent aversion, it seems, to people that become comfortable with death. And that's not to say that their job isn't necessary, but we think of like, a coroner or somebody that, does embalming even, right? And we think, how can you have that job? I'd never be able to do it because I think for most of us, and perhaps it's a societal, something that's ingrained societally, but we're not comfortable dealing with death, even though we all acknowledge that it's a reality, it's a fact of life. Mm-hmm. It's a societal, something that's ingrained societally, but we're not comfortable dealing with death, even though we all acknowledge that it's a reality, it's a fact of life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the fact that we aren't comfortable with death, even though it's so prevalent, is an indication that perhaps we weren't made to die or made to deal with death.
And then we also talked about how, look, if there is no higher power than humanity, that there's no moral arbiter.
Right, and that kind of plays into this postmodern idea or philosophy, right? In this idea that morals are relative, right? We call it moral relativism. That one set of morals or one moral paradigm is really no better than another. Mm-hmm. And that stems from the idea that morals are created by humans fundamentally, so humans can also change morals.
Right. So just because, you take the Green River Killer for instance, and he thought he was doing a good thing by killing prostitutes, and it's like, well, yeah, for most of us, like, prostitution may be less than ideal profession, but they still deserve life. Right. They still deserve to live, and they still, deserve that. And for him, it was a morality thing, and it was an issue. So,
right, and in that instance, he saw prostitution as a greater moral issue than murder.
Right.
And for most of us, we see it the other way around. But if there is no higher standard than humanity itself, then who's to say that one human set of morals is any better or worse than another human set of morals?
Right. Who's to say that he was wrong? Us? Like, just because we feel that way, or we're taught that way?
Right.
And it's like, well, no, it's actually because I think there are laws that were made before any of us were even around that's a wrong. What's up, everyone? This was an introduction video into why some of the reasons we believe what we do. If you would like to comment or have other questions on what we talked about, that's why we're here. Please comment below this video, and we would love to answer them in the following videos that are coming up. And if this video was if it was a blessing to you, if it was good for you, and please like it, subscribe, and maybe even share the video if it was helpful in any way. That would help us out, and I think it would help other people out who are maybe on a similar path. We'll see you all next time.